Once the underground business of bookies, the bread and butter of mobsters, sports gambling is officially going mainstream after the nation's highest court ruled yesterday that a federal law limiting the practice was unconstitutional. That means it'll be up to each state to decide if they want to legalize it or not. And on top of Nevada, where sports gambling has been allowed for years thanks to a legal loophole, a slew of other states are lining up to get in on the action. In fact, in New Jersey, locals may be able to bet on the NBA Finals just a couple of weeks away. Just before the Supreme Court decision was announced, the Seton Hall Sports Survey found that 55% of people in the country were in favor of legalized sports betting. So it looks like this $150 billion a year, largely underground industry is about to explode. But is that a good thing? And what does the future hold here in Massachusetts, where 3 state casinos have already signaled interest, and Boston-based fantasy sports website DraftKings seems to be celebrating already? I'm joined by former gubernatorial candidate Evan Falchuk. Evan, good to see you. Former Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley, now a partner at Foley Hoag, which represents DraftKings and Mohegan Sun. Good to see you, Martha. And Les Bernal, National Director of the group Stop Predatory Gambling. Good to see you, Les. I think we can agree on one thing across the board to start with. It's clear to me that what happens in Vegas is not going to stay in Vegas. This is coming to Massachusetts. Do we all agree that it is coming, or... No?
I strongly disagree.
You disagree?
There's no grassroots movement for sports gambling. This New Jersey case was driven by very powerful financial interests and a handful of self-serving politicians, which paid for by the taxpayer dollars of New Jersey.
Can I make the case that you're wrong, and I'll use the governor to make it? Here's Charlie Baker yesterday after the decision.
It's certainly something we should look at. I promise you that the vast majority of the states around the country will certainly take a look at it. And it really becomes a question of whether this is something that people believe ought to be part of their revenue stream, ought to be part of their entertainment industry or not.
So when you add that to the fact that the legislature has always been scared of taxes, not always, but for a long time, and stunningly to me, the leader of the House and the Senate both said yesterday they could do this legislation before the session's over, which is about a minute and a half from now. It's wired, no?
When it comes to state-sanctioned gambling, including sports betting, there's always been a disconnect between our public officials and what the public really wants. Citizens aren't demanding places for sports betting.
55% in America support it.
Yeah,
support it.
But
UMass has the same results.
No, but what that poll says, it doesn't mean they have a moral opposition to it. They just don't think government should be promoting it, and there's a difference.
You've been silent here. Where are you? You think it's happening?
Well, no? I haven't had a chance, but I'm happy to.
Do you think it's happening or no?
I think it would be less likely if we hadn't authorized the brick-and-mortar gaming, but since we've taken that step, I think that it's a question of when in Massachusetts.
What are the pros on this? I mean, the thing I heard most today is if 97% of what's currently done is illegal and we can shine some light on it, bring it out of the shadows, that's a plus. But what else is there?
Well, and let me echo that. I mean, 150, 200 million by some estimates is organized crime, unregulated. That is happening anyway. We are not good at regulating vices and prohibition. We've learned that as a country. We've learned that as a state. And so that's where you start, is to say people want to do this and they're doing it anyway. And I appreciate we are going to have problem gamblers, compulsive gamblers. We've got to deal with that. But if other states are going to do it, Massachusetts should consider it.
And the Gaming Commission said $8 to $60 million, which seems low to me in terms of state revenue, not in terms of the actual. Are there any other pluses here? You're not a big gambling kind of guy.
Well, I mean, the challenge is that there's a lot of unsavory people in this industry. As Martha's eloquently pointed out, Steve Wynn is a good example of that.
Well, he got rid of them, right?
Yeah, but this is where we need to have good, smart regulation. And we've got good leaders out there like Maura Healey, who's done a great job on these issues. But I hope that our legislature and the governor are wise enough to come up with smart regulations.
So you're okay if they do this issues. Right, whatever that means?
Well, as you point out, I think there's an inevitability about this. So we have to make sure that we do it in the right way that doesn't harm the public health, which is really what we're talking about.
I want to get your response to the positives here, but just to add one more. I am wildly opposed to the lottery, even though it helps cities and towns because it's so regressive. It's like Robin Hood in reverse. But ESPN, can you just put this up here? Did a profile of the average sports bettor, who is radically different from mostly poor people who play the lottery disproportionately. 42 years old, married, male, lives in the suburbs, household income of $74,000 or more. This is not a regressive, quote, tax, in quotes.
Well, it's important to note that ESPN has a vested interest. The big sports media companies, they're promoting this. So that profile of the sports gambler, they're already gambling. Those are people traveling to Las Vegas to place their bets. But we're talking
if they're already gambling, why shouldn't we take their money legally and put it in the state coffers?
Yeah, but we're not. They're not already gambling. We're going to put these guys are going to put millions of dollars of advertising behind sports gambling in our society. No one's advertising sports betting to the American people right now. If anyone wants to place a sports bet, they can go privately to do it and knock yourself out if that's what you want to do. But state government has no business encouraging people to do something that's financially against their best interests.
As a person who spent much of her life in state government, does it have a role, state government, in encouraging people to do what Les just described?
Well, we do it with the lottery now. I agree with you on that proposition. We also understand, I think, and we've learned through bringing gaming in, bringing marijuana in, all the vices that, we may have railed against. Let's put our energy where it makes sense, including, if we're going to do this, appropriate regulation and dealing with this issue of people who have compulsive gambling problems.
Very interesting to me, this poll that I put up in the beginning here, about 55% of people nationally in the Seton Hall poll right before the Supreme Court decision supporting it. In the same poll, look what they said about their concerns about integrity. Will legalized sports betting negatively impact the integrity of sports events? A narrow plurality, 48 to 42. This is what you used to be in charge of, integrity, when you were I'm saying, not that you gave it up, but I mean formally entitled of it. I mean, you don't have to look for it. It was not that long ago. Well, it was decades ago. BC men's basketball, one of the worst point shaving scandals, just a couple of miles from the studio.
Say it ain't so, Joe. I mean, we know that.
How do you worry about
I think we have that incentive now. We are sports crazed in this country. We have March Madness. I mean, every year I would get asked by some media outlet as AG, why aren't you enforcing the anti-gambling laws against March Madness? You know why? People want to do it. The President of the United States used to do it. And so let's recognize
Barack Obama and went on ESPN and listed his choices.
And I'm not being critical of the President. He's a basketball fan. I'm just saying that we can't change people's natures, but what we can do is educate people. We can provide for better tracking of it. If it has to be done in a way so it's not cash, then there's better ways to regulate it, protect consumers, and get some revenue for the state.
What's wrong with that? I mean, you don't accept that the train has left the station, but let's assume it does leave the station. Aren't they both talking about things that will pretty much protect the constituency you're worried about?
Right now, Reuters did a big study of Massachusetts around the country. It showed that 1 out of 2 citizens in the state don't own any assets whatsoever. They own no property, no stocks, no bonds. On the state lottery alone, the citizens of Massachusetts in 2016 lost $1.4 billion. So we're incentivizing, we have this huge inequality in our state and lack of opportunity. This goes far bigger than about gambling. When Elizabeth Warren stands up and says our system is rigged against everyday people, state-sanctioned gambling is Exhibit A, and they do it exempt from truth and advertising laws.
Can I add one thing before you respond to that? I know you wanted to. People may not know this at home. We spend more on lottery in this state per capita than any other state in the country by a lot. It's not like we narrowly edge out number 2. We are the biggest lottery players. This is before casinos, before this, all that sort of stuff.
Look, this argument is the one we've been having for the last 10 years around gambling. In a lot of ways, that train really has left the station. So what's incumbent upon leaders to be able to do is be wise and come up with sensible regulations. Should you be able to go to the Beanpot hockey tournament and bet? Should there be a machine at Fenway Park? No, you shouldn't. But we should have legislators that are able to sit down and say, this is where we draw the line.
But, Evan, when you say the train's left the station, you're pretty much saying the same thing. Is there a point at which we say enough is enough? I mean, this state, with the tax phobia on Beacon Hill and a governor who has pledged no new taxes, is so dependent on gambling. Lottery, cops, firefighters, and teachers. They appear to be running after this thing. Is there any gambling gambit that the state wouldn't embrace if it generated? Isn't there a point at which
I think
you have to say this might be an issue?
Yeah, it is an issue. I think we're too dependent on these sort of gimmicks to raise money for the state. It goes to the head of the line. So if we have a larger revenue problem, let's deal with that issue and not try to patch over.
Do you worry about that, about an over-reliance? If you add all of this gambling dependence that the state has developed, do you worry about that or no?
Well, you can argue that the way this is set up, people make a choice. And again, leaving aside the compulsive piece of it, from a libertarian point of view, people get to spend their time and money they want. If we're not going to be the nanny state and we're going to protect those who need protection, then look, if somebody wants to watch a sporting event rather than spend, $5,000 on a ticket to a concert, This is some of what we let people choose. So
but as a former public official, I agree to a point, but we're number one in the lottery, and then you add casinos, which haven't even opened, and then you add sports gambling. Is there a point at which you'd say, we just can't do this anymore? This is not the way to fund state services.
And you're making the opposite of a slippery slope argument that is getting, but I think we do make those decisions all the time. And New Hampshire drinks more beer than we do.
They do.
So every state has its own vices. But yes, we have a state that wants that income.
How do you decide? We only have 15 seconds left. How do you decide when enough is enough? For you, it's zero. But for public officials who pretty much said yes.
Any serious public official who wants to improve opportunity in our state, we've created a lottery class. We've taken a nation of small earners who could be small savers, and we've turned them into a nation of habitual bettors as a government program.
This debate's going to continue big time in the days that are bigly, I guess, is what you say, Evan.
We should be doing more financial literacy. I agree
I'm with you
on
too,
that.
Martha.
It's hard to do financial literacy when they're exempt from truth and advertising laws.
Thank you for your time.